Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down a really powerful and, honestly, kind of counterintuitive framework for competitive strategy. It really all boils down to this. What you don't say is often way more powerful than what you do.
All right, so let's jump right in with a bit of a puzzle. Think back to 2007. Nokia, they were on top of the world, right? They had almost half the entire smartphone market. And they were super open about it. Published these detailed roadmaps for everyone to see. Now, on the other hand, you had Apple, a total black box, a locked vault. And yet, Nokia's entire mobile division just fell apart, while Apple, of course, built an empire. So what gives? How on earth did one of the most transparent companies in tech get completely dismantled by one of the most secretive? And look, this isn't just some one-off story about phones. It's a pattern you start to see everywhere once you look for it. In boardrooms, in politics, yeah, even deep in the crypto world. Think about it. The people who talk the most, they're usually not the ones running the meeting. Power, it turns out, doesn't really flow to the most visible person. It flows toward the unreadable, toward opacity. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden framework that explains exactly why that is.
All right, section 1, the power paradox. So, first things first, we've got to flip a really common assumption completely on its head. We're always told that transparency is key, right? It builds trust, being visible is a sign of strength. But what if, in a truly competitive world, that's just dead wrong? What if being seen, being predictable, is actually a huge weakness?
And that brings us to the absolute core idea here, a lasting advantage. It isn't about having the biggest budget. It's not about having the most resources. It's about being unreadable. See, when your competitors have no idea what you're going to do next, they can't plan. They're forced to just react to you, constantly on the back foot. Real power isn't in the move you make. It's in the deep uncertainty you create about the move you might make.
Okay, so how do you actually use this? How do you turn this idea of being unreadable into a real actionable strategy? Well, that's where this framework called the Opacity Gradient comes into play. You can almost think of it as a playbook for weaponizing information, or maybe more accurately, the lack of information.
Most of the time when we think about strategy, we ask questions like, okay, what should we build, or what's the big announcement? This framework just takes that and flips it completely on its head. It asks a totally different and frankly, much more powerful question. What should we deliberately hide, and for how long? It's a huge shift, moving away from a strategy of just doing stuff to a strategy of controlling information.
So this whole thing unfolds in 3 levels, and they really build on each other. You start at level 1, which is all about signal discipline. Super simple, right? It just means controlling what you say, what signals you put out there. Then you get to level 2, which is more aggressive. That's calculated revelation. This is where you strategically break your silence, but you do it to reveal something with overwhelming force. And then the final goal, level 3, is what's called adaptive identity. This is where you become so good at reinventing yourself, so unpredictable, that nobody, and I mean nobody, can get a read on you. Ever.
Okay, I know this all sounds a little theoretical. So, to see how it actually works in the real world, let's check out 2 absolute masters of this from completely different times.
First up, King Louis XIV of France. This guy reigned for 72 years. And his main tool for control, it wasn't his army, it was just ambiguity. Whenever his ministers would come to him with some big proposal, his go-to answer was always this one simple phrase: I will consider it. That's it. It gave them absolutely nothing. No yes, no no. And it drove his entire court crazy, forcing them into this constant state of anxiety, always second-guessing, always trying to figure out what he was thinking. His silence did all the heavy lifting for him. That is level 1 signal discipline in its absolute purest form.
Now, for masterclass in level 2, you gotta look at Steve Jobs when he came back to Apple. After all those years out in the wilderness, he didn't show up with some open, transparent 5-year plan. No way. He came back with secrets, and then he delivered this series of perfectly timed killer strikes. Boom, the iMac. Then, boom, the iPod. And then, the ultimate masterstroke, the iPhone. Think about this. A calculated reveal so powerful it killed Apple's own biggest hit product, the iPod. He wasn't just competing anymore. With every single reveal, he was resetting the entire industry and leaving everyone else just scrambling to catch up.
But hold on. It would be a massive mistake to walk away from this thinking that just being quiet or secretive is some kind of magic formula for success. It's not. For every single master of opacity, there is a graveyard just filled with companies and people who tried it and failed spectacularly. We have to talk about the danger here.
And this right here is probably the most critical warning in this whole explainer. Opacity isn't magic. It's just a multiplier. That's it. So if you have something genuinely game-changing under the hood, opacity is amazing. It protects it and amplifies its impact. But if you're hiding nothing, or even worse, if you're hiding a fatal flaw, well then opacity just makes the eventual collapse that much bigger.
And we have two, well, perfect and really tragic examples of this. Theranos. They used extreme secrecy not to protect some revolutionary tech, but to hide the simple fact that their tech didn't work at all. And then you have Terra/Luna. They used all this confident, complex, opaque language to hide a really fragile system underneath. In both cases, the secrecy didn't create any real power. All it did was delay the inevitable. And when the explosion finally came, it was catastrophic, wiping out billions and billions of dollars.
So, if this is such a dangerous, high-stakes tool, how do you actually use it effectively? How do you avoid ending up in that graveyard we just talked about? Well, it all boils down to one absolutely critical directional rule.
It's simple. The gradient has to face outward. The whole entire point of this strategy is to be unreadable to the outside world, to your competitors, to the market, to anyone who could use that information against you. To them, you should be a locked vault.
But never inward. The second that secrecy turns inward, the moment it starts confusing your own team, it stops being a strategic weapon and it turns into organizational poison. Fast. Because if your own people don't get the mission or understand the real strategy, you don't have a secret anymore. You just have chaos. And that's a direct path to dysfunction, paralysis, and ultimately failure.
All right, so let's boil this all down to the key takeaways. First, remember, opacity is a multiplier, not a value creator. Second, the timing of a reveal is often way more important than what you're actually revealing. Third, yeah, being unreadable is powerful, but it's expensive. It can cost you trust. And finally, the golden rule above all else. Your team needs radical, absolute clarity, even if the rest of the world just sees a vault.
So we'll leave you with this one last thing to chew on. Seriously, take a second and think about this for your own organization, your own project. If your most dangerous competitor had access to every single thing your organization shared publicly in the last year, what strategy would they build against you? Because if you can answer that question easily, you can bet they can too.